There's a story, the mother rushed her toddler to the emergency department, swallowed a couple coins, a couple pennies and dimes, and they examined the child, and sure enough, there was in the stomach, there were some nickels and dimes in the stomach. The toddler just swallowed these things, and they assured her that, don't worry, we'll just keep it for observation to make sure there's no infection or blockage, and it'll pass. Don't worry. Well, the mother, of course, called her husband. He dropped everything at work, and he rushed to the hospital and called from the car and says, "Has anything happened yet? Has anything passed?" And his wife replied, "I'm sorry, dear, no change yet." Didn't see that coming, huh? The second reading we're hearing these Sundays is for those of us, those times in our lives when we're stuck, when there's no change yet. At times, some of us, with times we get stuck. And we come to Mass, faithfully. We're here every Mass, 8 o'clock, and every Sunday, faithfully. Here's our seat, and we're faithfully here. We praise God, we sing, we listen, we come to communion. And then as soon as we get home, not even before we turn off the key in the driveway, it's just like that never happened. And we're just back to where everything's were before. It might be struggles in the marriage or with the kids. It might be a bad relationship. It might be worries at work, or the money's tight, and just freaking out with the money. Bad health, more doctor visits, and it just seems like it never ends. They're busier than ever, and you're just stuck. And so there's times in our lives when we just get stuck, and no matter what we do, it just seems we just can't change. There's no change yet. These are times, let's pick up the letter of James. The letter of James, we just heard in the second reading, is all about action, taking action. That leads us no longer be stuck, but to be following the Lord. And not just hear the words of the Lord, but be doers of the word of the Lord. And that's what James is all about. In particular today, James tells us, be partial to the poor. Be partial to the poor. We heard how James says, if a rich man walks into your assembly and he's wearing rings and fine clothes and says, you come in and say, "Oh, come up, right up front. Say, welcome, welcome, welcome." While a poor person, shabby clothes, comes in, no rings, and you say, "Here, sit at my feet. Sit in the back." And James says, no, that's not how you do it. That's not how you do it at all. No, you should be partial to the poor. Treat them well. Our church teaches us, in fact, to have a preferential option for the poor. To choose the poor. To have a preferential option for the poor. And the document our bishops have put together for the upcoming elections and faithful citizenship, they say a basic moral test for society is how it treats its most vulnerable members. I was having lunch yesterday with a woman. She's a business manager in a doctor's office. She says, "Father, I don't know how people do it. We say it's okay, just $25 a month, just pay us as you can." And sometimes they call and says, I don't have $25 this month. And they say, "That's all right, pay next month." But all the tests they need and all the treatments they need, she said, "I don't know how they do it, because they're just not making it. They're just not making it." A basic moral test for our society is how we treat our most vulnerable members. They go on to say the church is to speak for the voiceless, defend the defenseless, assess our lifestyles, policies, institutions, how they impact those most in need. With the upcoming elections, this is worthy bearing in mind this preferential option for the poor, for those in need. And you're sitting there thinking, well, okay, how does this help me get unstuck? Father, what's this have to do about being stuck and just kind of life isn't changing at all? How does this help me get unstuck? Well, the short answer is this is what Jesus did. And when we're close to the Lord, he changes you. Jesus himself, he said, "I was hungry and he gave me to eat. I was thirsty, he gave me to drink." Jesus identifies with the poor. And so we want to find the Lord who changes heaven and earth and changes us. That's where he is, with the poor. Jesus was born poor, he lived poor, he died poor. As poor it can be. He's definitely with the poor, and that's where we find the Lord. Second, Jesus commanded us. When the rich man came to Jesus and says, "What must I do to follow you? I've done all the commandments. I go to church. I honor my mother and father. I don't lie. I don't cheat. I do all the good things. I don't commit adultery." And Jesus says, "There's one thing you're lacking. Go sell all you have and give it to the poor. And then you'll have treasure in heaven, and come follow me." Jesus commands it. That everything we have is a gift from God and for his purposes. It's a gift to the poor. And third, Jesus went to the poor. He went to those in need. Let me show you what I mean. Marco, I need your help over here. Okay. So this deaf man, people brought this deaf man to Jesus. This deaf man couldn't hear, couldn't speak, probably didn't know what was going on. They brought him to Jesus, and Jesus took him away from the crowd, and then he got into the guy's face. He did this. He put his fingers in his ears like this. Feeling comfortable?
A little bit.
A little uncomfortable? Feeling it? It gets worse. Because then Jesus looked at heaven and groaned. And then spitting, stick out your tongue. Oh my gosh, he did it. All right, talk about in your face. How's that feel? I don't know. Let's give Marco a round of applause, okay? Jesus got intimate. He got in the face of the deaf man. He got intimate with his people. As close as he can be. And think of the word intimacy. Into me see. That's what the Lord wants with us. That we know him as he knows us, intimately, in our face. Jesus went to the poor and connected with them. He could have stood away and said, okay, you be healed. No, he got in their face. And healing took place. Be partial to the poor and things will change. Things will change. So last week we had our collection for the Sister Diocese of the Dominican Republic, and we took the collection. That's wonderful. But what about sponsoring a child? Just getting a picture of a kid in a poor country and sticking on the refrigerator with the grandkids. Right there, establishing relationship. Jesus said, I was hungry, and you wrote me a check? No. You fed me. You gave me to eat. So a sick person or someone in need, or neighbor, friend, relatives, just to get to know them and take them food and to be with them. That's the deepest hunger. That deepest hunger for love. Be partial to the poor, and it will change you. Let me give you an example of how this happened in their life. As a priest, in fact, a priest. Some years ago in the country of El Salvador, this priest had gone to Rome, studied, came back, he was noted for his piety. He said his prayers. He's disciplined himself. In fact, other priests, a little envious of him because he's so holy in his mannerisms. He was always at meetings, kind of a bureaucrat, rose through the system, became a bishop. And at the same time, El Salvador people were starting to organize and recognize maybe it wasn't God's will that most of the country was illiterate. Maybe it wasn't God's will that there was an oligarchy with controlling everything. Maybe it wasn't God's will that the poor would work in the fields all day and come home when they still would not have money to buy medicine for their children. Maybe this wasn't God's will that they had to sleep in the fields at night. Maybe this wasn't God's will. And of course, so there's conflict started coming up, and there's military oppression. And this priest, he wrote that the church should not be involved. The church shouldn't get involved in politics. The church is a perfect society. The church should not be involved in these things. Yet 2 years later, he was involved. He switched. And such a great change in his life happened. He refused to go to the inauguration of the president, a new president who was under shady elections. A general became president. He refused to go to the inauguration. It was a big scandal because the Archbishop always goes to these inaugurations. He wrote to President Jimmy Carter to say, stop shipping military arms to our country. They're killing our people. And then he preached every Sunday at the cathedral, broadcast to the country. He preached not for 5 minutes or 10 minutes, he preached for an hour and a half. He would talk about scriptures, and he talked about the events of the day, things that the government wouldn't allow in the newspaper. And every radio was tuned to it. The taxis would be playing this, there'd be no one on the streets. Everyone would be listening to what he had to say. One time he gave us a particular speech. He spoke directly to the policemen and to the military people. He said, stop killing your own people. Stop killing your brothers and sisters. Stop the repression. And then the radio operator for the diocese radio station heard this buzzing in her headphones and thought it was the government jamming the signal to prevent this message from going out to the people, and heard this loud buzzing, and then realized it was applause. It was applause because the bishop spoke the truth. He spoke the truth. And so much so that the next day, celebrating Mass, just after the consecration, after elevating the host, just after the consecration, an assassin put a .22 caliber bullet through his heart. And he's martyred. This is Archbishop Romero, is being canonized next month and declared a saint to the church. What changed in his life that he went from a priest who was pious and holy and in church and to out and speaking up for the poor and saying the church must be involved? What changed? Well, one time he noticed that the coffee bean workers, it was on cold winter nights, he'd asked another priest, where do they sleep? They're always out in the fields. Where do they sleep? He says, well, they sleep in the fields in the cold. And the bishop will open a school up for them so they have a place to sleep at night, a Catholic school. And the bishop, in fact, went there himself and just got to know them, heard their stories. Just got to know the poor. Then he organized lawyers to investigate disappearances of people. These death squads were making people disappear. And he organized lawyers and he read their stories, got to know the people. He went to funerals of those who've been killed, catechists in the church been killed, and he got to know their stories. And he presided at funerals of 6 of his own priests who were killed. And some people said, priests should not be getting killed. And he said, yes, they should, because that means they're with the people who are getting killed. We are with the people in their suffering. What changed? He got intimate with the poor. Father Romero became intimate with the poor and gave his life with the poor. And he's being ordained next month, canonized next month by Pope Francis. St. James tells us, be doers of the word. Not just hearers only, deluding yourself, but be doers of the word, and things will change. And be partial to the poor. That's where the Lord is. That's where the kingdom happens. Things will change. And you might be sitting here thinking, like, Father, that sounds really hard. That's not isn't there a self-help book or something I can do better to change things? Well, maybe. But what can happen? Worst thing can happen, you try this for a month, try it for 6 months, and nothing changes. But I guarantee it will change when you're partial to the poor. Be doers of the word, and the word will change you.